Okay, so this is the background of The Handmaid's Tale. And I tried really hard. I made pictures. I'm disappointed you can't see my effort in person. So, just a reminder, in case I didn't have you sophomore year or you didn't study dystopias before, traditional dystopias don't have social groups. It's basically the we of the state, so you can't have Girl Scouts or sports teams or that kind of thing. There's extreme economics. Usually the government takes over and there's like a rationing system, or something like Amazon would take over, and that'd be more the case of like a Brave New World. But usually it's the government, like 1984. There's elimination of any competing parties in government, so there's just one party who's in power forever. There's no nature, because nature represents freedom. And then there's usually a small rebel group, so the protagonist is going to put his or her hope in this group, who's going to try to either escape the society or destroy it. So I just wanted to point out that this has a lot of ties to the Scarlet Letter. So the Scarlet Letter is not a dystopia, but a lot of these things, the elimination of competing parties because it's theocracy, the woods are the devil, Hester is the little rebel. A lot of that fits if you want to compare and contrast the Scarlet Letter and the Handmaid's Tale as sort of competing dystopias. Okay, so Atwood had 3 influences when she wrote this in the 80s, and the first was the falling birth rate. So the replacement rate for humanity is something around 2.2. So if you have a mother and a father, which you don't necessarily have to have, but just, genetically, you have to replace the mother and the father with 2 kids. It's 2.2 because to account for early death. So you can see during the 20s it was about 3.5. During the Great Depression it was about 2.2. And then there was the baby boom where you can see it goes above 3.5. And then during the recession, it keeps dropping down below the replacement rate. And we're really down below the replacement rate right now. Japan, I think, is at 1. So their population is set to be cut in half in the next 100 years or so. So Atwood took this and made it a fertility crisis in The Handmaid's Tale. So this was just economic choices. We can't afford to have 2 children, but in The Handmaid's Tale, there's actually some kind of plague affecting fertility. Sorry. And this is the birth rate as it relates to GDP. So if you have, so over here are rich countries. No, never mind. Over here are rich countries, like the US and a lot of Europe. Over here are poor countries. So unfortunately, the birth rate is falling in the wealthier countries who can afford to have children, and rising in places like Sub-Saharan Africa, India, places like that, where they can't necessarily afford to have children. So in a wealthy country like us, we're below the replacement rate. See, we're right at 2. And then in countries that do not have a large GDP, they're way above the replacement rate. So that's where we have sort of like the immigration crisis and the food crisis and stuff like that. But The Handmaid's Tale is set in some place like the U.S., so we're going to be well below the replacement rate. Okay, so the first influence of The Handmaid's Tale is the fertility rate. The second is the rise of the Christian right as a political power. So normally Christians are just, doing religion, but in the 80s, several key figures rose as more political figures as opposed to just, preachers. And this is typically non-denominational Christian groups. So there's Jerry Falwell, who just died 13 years ago. He founded the Thomas Road Baptist Church, a mega church in Virginia. He also founded Lynchburg Christian Academy and co-founded the Moral Majority. So the Moral Majority is important because it's a political party based on Christian morality. So we kind of lose the separation of church and state. There's a fun quote on 9/11 that you can read here. And then the important one for The Handmaid's Tale is the idea of feminists. So he says, I listen to the feminists and all these radical gals. Most of them are failures. They've blown it. Some of them had been married, but they married some Casper Milquetoast, who was like a a weak white man who asks permission just to go to the bathroom. These women need a man in the house. That's all they need. Most of the feminists need a man to tell them what time of day it is and to lead them home. And they blew it, and they're mad at all men. Feminists hate men. They're sexist. They hate men. That's their problem. So this backlash on feminism is going to be big in The Handmaid's Tale, along with this idea of politics joining with religion. There's also Pat Robertson. He, again, was against feminism. He said that women need a man because, it's parallel to Christ. So I'm going to read this quote here. I know this is painful for the ladies to hear, but if you get married, you have accepted the headship of a man, your husband. Christ is the head of the household. The husband is the head of the wife, and that's the way it is, period. And then he is the founder of the CBC, which is the Christian Broadcast Network, or CBN. This is a fun fact. He warned that some sects of Protestantism harbor the spirit of the Antichrist, Hinduism is demonic, and Islam is satanic. So these are the kind of male figures that Atwood includes as the founding fathers of her dystopia. Okay, these two aren't so harmful. So it's Jim and Tammy Faye Baker. They founded the 700 Club, which is a morning TV show for, morality, basically. They also had a show called Jim and Tammy, and they founded the PTL, the Praise the Lord Club, in the mid-70s. They actually ended up getting divorced and being sort of scandalous. But the reason I wanted to show you this is because Tammy here is going to be, you can't really see it. Tammy is going to be kind of an important figure and actually directly referenced in The Handmaid's Tale. And finally, we've got James Dobson. He founded Focus on the Family, which is, again, sort of a political party that overlaps with Christian morality. And he made a point, and you can read this when you have time, that showing the body supports porn, which coarsens our culture, degrades women, and led to the death of a woman whose infant daughter needs her now. We need to find a place between prudes and porn. The future of our culture and the dignity of both men and women depend on us finding such a place now. So basically, this is where Atwood takes her uniforms for the dystopia. So all women are covered at all time, so they're respected. Okay, so first influence, the falling birth rate. Second influence, the rise of the Christian right as a political force. And then the third influence is the fear of theocracy. So remember, the Scarlet Letter theocracy is where you have no separation of church and state. Your religious head is also your political head. So the Islamic Revolution had just taken place in 1979, about 5 years before she published The Handmaid's Tale. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan led to a resurgence in fundamentalist Islam. So basically, Reagan, who was in power at this time, thought that the U.S. Was God, was Christian, and the communists were atheists, and we needed to save ourselves from being taken over by other religions, because then we would lose God and be just as bad as the communists. He calls Russia the evil empire. You can watch this speech if you want to, but he basically says that he would rather Americans die still believing in God than grow up in communist Russia, because, that's a fate worse than death. So we're afraid of theocracies. Let's see. Afghanistan becomes a theocracy, I think. Yeah, and a couple other Middle Eastern countries, and then obviously Russia and China are sort of officially atheist. So we're afraid of losing, in God we trust as sort of the American backbone. Okay, and there's where I took all this information from. So remember the Scarlet Letter as you read The Handmaid's Tale, and remember these three influences, which are the falling birth rate, the rise of the Christian right, and the fear of either atheism or theocracies. And I think you'll like it. It's easy to read, it's fast, it's fun. Not fun in a Disney World kind of way, but fun and an interesting, I never thought of that way. Okay, bye.